Hey everyone, it's Alex the Real Mr. Robinson, and welcome back to my chronological recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is part 8, and we are talking about Iron Man 3. Now, at the end of my last video, when I did my recap of the Avengers, I called Iron Man 3 the last Jedi of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There are a couple reasons why I consider this to be like the last Jedi, but the main reason in particular is that it's probably the most controversial Marvel Cinematic Universe film out there. Now, thankfully, it hasn't gotten the same toxic reaction from fans the way The Last Jedi did, because I think everyone is in agreement with this movie. Whether you love it or hate it, it's not one of Marvel's best. I remember seeing this movie when it came out in the theaters. I was finishing up my first year of college at UC Santa Cruz, and I was excited for this. I was hyped. I was coming off the high of the Avengers, having seen it 6 times in the theater, so I was ready for whatever Phase 2 had to offer. And I walked out of this movie liking it. This was the first new release that I ever reviewed on this channel, and I remember saying that it's worth seeing in your lifetime, but there was definitely a lot keeping me from actually loving this movie. And even then, when I first did the review, I think I had to convince myself that it was worth seeing in your lifetime. So having rewatched the movie several times, most recently to do this review, I have no problem saying that it's worth seeing in your lifetime. I unapologetically like this movie a lot. It's definitely a lot better than Iron Man 2. It has a lot of great elements to it that I think people often disregard. This time, Jon Favreau's not in the director's chair, but instead it's Shane Black, who's also co-writing the film. And Shane Black just seemed like the perfect guy to tackle Tony Stark as a character, because just like with the other movies, he's got some great dialogue, he's got a great personality, Robert Downey Jr. delivers, and it's amazing, despite being able to tell the difference between Shane Black's writing style versus Joss Whedon's, Tony Stark still remains the same character. He still says stuff that feel in character to his character. And in this movie, he's dealing with the aftermath of the Avengers, building a whole ton of Iron Man suits, doing little details and prep work for Avengers Tower. And also, I think at this point, damage control is a thing. We'll talk about damage control a couple movies from now. And I even like in this movie that his relationship with Pepper is a little more meaningful. He's created all these Iron Man suits mainly to protect her from any future alien invasions. And there's no annoying arguments like there were in Iron Man 2 where you just wanted to claw your own eyes out and just say, shut up. The minute this movie even starts to replicate that moment, Tony Stark opens up and goes, okay, I admit it, my fault, I'm a piping hot mess right now. So at least he's being a little more honest, and maybe he's learned a little bit of humanity after the events of the Avengers. Again, the key word is a little bit, because he's still kind of reckless, he's still arrogant. So arrogant that he gives the villains his home address on live TV. And people have just called this out as being the dumbest thing that Tony Stark has done, and that everything that happened to him right afterwards he deserved. And they're not wrong. He definitely had that coming. And it's just so weird that he would even give out his home address, because Tony Stark is not one to really just give away any secret information, like tell the world that he's Iron Man. Oh, wait, that actually did happen. So him giving the entire world his home address is really not out of character. It's just like with Infinity War, where people got so mad at Peter Quill for ruining that one shot to get the gauntlet from Thanos, and they're not wrong. But to say that that's out of character for him is wrong, because it's totally in character for him to do something like that. And it's totally in character for Tony Stark to do something brash and stupid like this. The one thing that just doesn't work for me, though, I mean, it has the potential to work, is all the PTSD that he's experiencing after going through the wormhole in the Avengers. For me, the PTSD is just kind of inconsistent. It comes in and out. It's like whenever Peter Parker loses his ability to shoot webs in Spider-Man 2. It just comes in whenever it's convenient for the plot. Except I think in this movie, it's wrapped up a little tighter than in Spider-Man 2. That's not saying a whole lot, because it just kind of goes away. When Tony Stark's having one of his panic attacks, he's in communication with a kid that kind of boosts his confidence and tells him that you're an inventor, you can fix stuff, right? Keep in mind, this is the same guy that built a mini arc reactor in a cave with a box of scraps. I just love quoting it like that. But yeah, Tony Stark is a master inventor. He doesn't really need to depend on an Iron Man suit in order to be badass. And that's one of the things that I love about this movie and Tony Stark. It takes the story of the man behind the suit and really shows how effective he can be without the suit. Showing us that while he can put anyone in an Iron Man suit and anybody could wear an Iron Man suit, there's only one Tony Stark out there. And Tony Stark is what makes Iron Man so special. I thought they handled this hero behind the suit storyline infinitely better than The Dark Knight Rises. You can go watch my updated Dark Knight Rises review to find out why it didn't work for me in that movie. I'm not going to go into detail here. So yeah, that's what they do with Tony Stark, but let's talk about the villain. The villain in Iron Man 3 is the Mandarin. And the Mandarin is a real point of conversation in this movie because it's going to either break it for you or make it for you. When we first heard that Sir Ben Kingsley was going to be playing the Mandarin, and when we first saw the trailers, we thought, wow, this is going to be a great villain right there. He sounds menacing, he's got the voice, and the first part of the movie, you really buy the fact that he's a menace. He's the leader of the Ten Rings, the organization that kidnapped Tony Stark in the first movie, so it's a nice way to bring it full circle to the first Iron Man. That the government can't track him. They've rebranded War Machine into Iron Patriot just to find this guy. I'll get back to Iron Patriot in a little bit. So they do a great build-up to this villain, and we can't wait to see what he's gonna do. And then Tony Stark actually finds the location of the Mandarin, and we get this huge 180 twist where the Mandarin's actually a broken down actor named Trevor Slattery, a broken down, washed up British drunk that's been playing the Mandarin as an act. And I didn't know how to take it at first. People just lost their minds stating that this twist is the only reason they hated Iron Man 3. And I can get being thrown off because I was sure as hell thrown off, and when I walked out of the movie I was like, why did they do that? Like, I originally hated that twist walking out, but then I thought about it before doing my review, and I'm like, well, is that the only thing I hate about Iron Man 3? Like, is that one little detail worthy of ruining the entire movie for me? Even after I finished doing my original review, I just thought, did I just convince myself that I like the movie, but I actually don't? But I will use one line from Trevor Slattery in this movie to sum up my feelings about the Mandarin. Well, at first I panicked, but then I handled it. Having watched this movie several other times beforehand, and just really looking at the twist, I think it's downright clever. It's a very clever twist, because the whole deal with the Mandarin is that he's this terrorist that's causing all these attacks on America, and nobody can find this guy. So when we get the full breakdown that the villain of Aldrich Killian, played by Guy Pearce, is the one that manufactured the Mandarin just to fix some accidents with his extremist program, that's actually clever. Like, imagine if Osama bin Laden wasn't actually a Middle Eastern terrorist. What if he was somebody that was just conjured up by either the government or another party to send the government on this wild goose chase? That's kind of inventive. And sure, it does take away the potential of the Mandarin being a real character, but again, I think it's a clever twist, and Marvel did do a short film, All Hail the King, just for them to go, okay, you want the Mandarin? Here, the Mandarin actually does exist. We're not going to show him, but yeah, he exists in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Whether they actually get to that plot point or not is still up in the air. Highly doubtful, but you never know. And hey, if nothing else, I'll say these two things about the Mandarin twist. A, it's no longer the most disappointing thing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And B, this twist has held up much better than Bill Maher's cameo in this movie. Yeah, the guy who disrespected Stan Lee's legacy after he died wouldn't apologize for it and doubled down on the fact that comic books got Donald Trump elected has a cameo in this movie. Granted, this was made before Stan Lee passed away, but man, does that cameo not hold up, and I hope you're enjoying that Marvel money, Bill Maher. Now let's get back to Guy Pearce as Aldrich Killian, who is the main villain of the film. He's pretty much a better version of Sam Rockwell in Iron Man 2, which I completely ignored when I did my recap of Iron Man 2, which is a shame because he was actually one of the better parts of that movie also. Much better than Mickey Rourke as Whiplash. But when I first saw this movie, I just thought, Yeah, Guy Pearce is not that interesting of a villain. He's just this wealthy millionaire who created the Mandarin to fix up some accidents with his extremis program. Nothing much to this character. And I just had the same thought every time I rewatched this movie. Up until the most recent viewing. The most recent time I saw this movie, I was like, this dude is a creep. We first meet this character in a flashback in 1999 where he tries to team up with Tony Stark, and he's awkward, he's got a small disability, he walks around with a cane, he's got super long hair. He's pretty much Jim Carrey as Edward Nygma in Batman Forever. But then when we're reintroduced to him in the present time, he's more handsome, he's no longer walking around with a cane, he seems very confident in himself, so you're like, okay, even though he got rejected by Tony Stark, he still managed to do well for himself, but he just tries to play himself as very intimate with Pepper Potts. Once it's revealed that the Mandarin is just this big fake, he doesn't really have any motivation to continue with this Mandarin act outside the fact that it'll play well on TV and there needs to be a finale to this thing. And then he kidnaps Pepper Potts. He doesn't really seem to have any real beef with Tony Stark because he managed to do well for himself afterwards. But he takes Pepper Potts, injects her with extremis to make her, I guess, his, like, Bride of Frankenstein equivalent. That's just so downright creepy. It just doesn't really work in terms of a compelling villain. I mean, to be honest, this is one instance where I wish the Mandarin twist didn't happen, because I feel like if Ben Kingsley had really been playing the real Mandarin, then it could have been better than Aldrich Killian, but I will still stand by defending that twist. Now, in terms of the supporting characters, you got Gwyneth Paltrow again as Pepper Potts. The relationship between her and Tony Stark is better than in Iron Man 2. She's still a likable character, not much else to her. Don Cheadle's back in this movie as Rhodes. They didn't swap actors again. And this time he dons the Iron Patriot armor, basically a rebrand of the War Machine armor. Now, I know in the comics, the Iron Patriot armor was property of Norman Osborn. I don't know the exact reasoning or context for why Norman Osborn has an Iron Man suit like that, but for the sake of this movie, it actually does make a little more sense. Although I do have to say, when I saw the Iron Patriot armor, I first thought, yeah, I mean, it does make sense, but that's just a recipe for disaster waiting to happen. Because unlike Captain America, where only one guy could fit that role, anybody could be in the Iron Patriot armor. So you know it's only a matter of time before the Mandarin's forces steal that thing and use it against the US government, and sure enough, that actually happens. So yeah, that was a big flaw right there. And while I do like Don Cheadle in the role, he's got some really good lines as well. He doesn't really do much in the Iron Patriot armor. He actually does more outside of the armor than he does in, which I guess is cool because we get to see him be in more action scenes and really see what he can do outside of the armor. And then you have Rebecca Hall as Maya Hansen, and I love Rebecca Hall. She serves her role in this movie, doesn't really have that much else to do. You have Ty Simpkins in this movie as a little kid who befriends Tony Stark when he's stranded in Tennessee. And it's a fun dynamic between these two. Not much to the character though, but it's a fun dynamic. There's a lot of good lines in this movie, and a lot of good writing from Shane Black as well. Although, once again, he still can't help himself with putting in a pussy joke. I mean, this movie, it's a lot funnier than his pussy joke in The Predator, which was just awkward and out of place. And I don't remember a whole lot about The Nice Guys, but I want to say that there's a pussy joke in that. There was a pussy joke in Predator, the original. And I never saw Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, but if there's a pussy joke in that movie, then I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. I just don't understand what his fascination with pussy jokes are, but whatever, that's Shane Black, he can do what he can do. Which leads into the humor of the movie. There's a lot of good humor in this movie. There's a lot of really great lines. There's a Christmas storyline in this movie that made me laugh hard, because of course Shane Black has to sneak Christmas somewhere into all of his movies. But some of the humor also reminds me of The Last Jedi. There are some slapstick moments in this movie that just seem to go a little too over the top and just aren't really effective. In the Avengers they worked, but in Iron Man 3, not all the jokes really hit. Funny that the humor going from the Avengers to Iron Man 3 is very parallel with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, where the previous film had really great humor and most of the jokes hit, whereas in the second one, there's some that hit, but some that fall very flat. The action's really cool as well. There are 3 major set pieces in this movie that I dig a lot. For one, the attack on Tony Stark's mansion is very brutal. It goes on for a while. It's intense, where Tony Stark has to work work with a barely working Mark 42. There's a scene involving Air Force One where a bunch of employees are sucked out of the airplane and Tony Stark has to catch all of them in mid-air. He has to catch 13 people knowing he can only carry 4. That's intense. That's an intense scene right there. And I like how the big climax of the movie is not a repeat of the climax in Iron Man 1 and 2. It's actually different, it's somewhat inventive, and it's nice to see Tony Stark go up against somebody who's not just in a bigger Iron Man suit. And it's also satisfying to see that Pepper Potts is the one to kill off Aldrich Killian, considering how creepy he's been to her. So yeah, I think this movie's a lot of fun. I think it's definitely aged well over time. I appreciate a lot more about this movie. The score in the movie I don't think gets enough credit. It's a very majestic score. It's really badass as well. It's not as cool as the score in Iron Man 1, but I think this one's pretty underlooked. And as I said at the beginning of this review, I'll stand by my original rating, worth seeing in your lifetime. It's got some good humor in some segments, the action's exciting, Tony Stark is charming, and I love how the end credits of this movie are stylized to be like an old TV show from the 1970s, complete with a really cool song. So yeah, I dig this movie a lot. It is in some way a disappointment coming off of the huge success of the Avengers, but again, just because something's a disappointment doesn't mean it's bad, it just didn't live up to the expectations that the Avengers had. As for the Stan Lee cameo in this movie, there's not a whole lot. It's just him being a judge for a Christmas-themed beauty pageant. It's fun. Not much else to say there. And since there's no mid-credit stinger, there's just the end stinger, it's not much. With the beginning and the end of the movie, Tony Stark is narrating this story, and we get some closure with that when we realize that he's basically going through therapy, but his therapist is Bruce Banner, which I'm sure they did all that in Avengers Tower. But Bruce Banner throughout the entire story just fell asleep, and just tells Tony, I'm not that kind of doctor, I'm not trained in this kind of field. And then Tony Stark starts to talk about the idea that he had a nanny as old as 14 years old and how weird it was, and then the movie ends right there. It's not really worth sitting through. It's an amusing stinger, but doesn't really lead up to anything. It's just there for a joke. A funny one, but not much else to it. So there you go, that's my recap for Iron Man 3. Next up, we're going to talk about the movie that almost made me lose interest in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thor: The Dark World. I honestly dreaded rewatching this movie, but we're here. I can't do an MCU recap without Thor: The Dark World, so it's just better to do it sooner than later. But until then, I want to hear what you guys think about Iron Man 3. When you first saw it in the theaters, what did you think of it? Has your opinion changed over time? Do you still feel about it the way that you do? I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about this movie 6 years later. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and of course leave a comment. Don't forget to support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.